Welcome to This Sea Ranch Life. My name is George Callis. Today we're going to hear from our newest board members here at the Sea Ranch, Dibby Tyler, Gina Hubble, and Rob Bedichek. Join us as we hear from our three newest candidates. Hi there, folks. Our first successfully elected director is Debby Tyler. Dibby's well known to a lot of folks here around the Sea Ranch. Dibby's been served on the Sea Ranch board numerous times. I'm not even sure how many. And besides that, has been involved in a variety of volunteer projects. There's probably not much about the Sea Ranch, in my opinion, that Dibby doesn't know about. Dibby, thanks for joining us today and taking a little time with people.
Thank you for doing this, George.
Let's kick off. So you're back on the board after a hiatus of several years, but you've
10
years away. Okay, but you've been following and you're aware of what's going on at Sea Ranch, and in many cases, I believe, have followed a lot of topics and issues and have contributed. Let's talk about the next 3 years, because your term is a 3-year term. Give me some idea of what you think, maybe the important things just over the next 3-year period, your term on the board. What are the topics and issues that you think the board will need to deal with, or you'd like to see the board deal with, or the issues that are important to you over the next 3-year period?
I think one of the first things we'll have to deal with in terms of issues is the sewer district. Whether Sea Ranch should take on the responsibility of operating the sewer district, whether the Gualala Sewer District is going to take it over, or some other entity. Are we going to form a special district for it, or do it under the water company? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there.
Right. And
it's imminent. It's imminent.
Yeah.
The county wants to unload it, and they're currently, we actually do most of the work, but we're compensated by the county for it.
Right. And so for our listeners who maybe aren't up to speed on this one, Sonoma County wants to divest themselves of these smaller water districts that they've been that they own, and that means the choices are: we form our own sanitary district, that's one choice, or the Gualala sewer district. We could be wrapped into them. There might be other choices that I'm not aware of, but you're right, that's the big one. Well, what else in the next? That is a big one. What else in the next 3 years do you think is important?
Well, everything is important.
Yeah.
And the things that come up, you have to deal with as they come up. And my experience being on the board before is that the things I thought I would be dealing with were not the things I actually dealt with. You had to deal with what came along. And so that's what I'm ready to do.
Right.
Whatever comes, I'll give it my best go. And you can't always predict. We've got huge responsibilities in terms of vegetation management. That's a big area. We're going to spend money on it, and I think that's an important issue.
Dibby, help our viewers understand why is the vegetation management a big deal? We've had 2 years of big winter storms. We've got a lot of issues. Elaborate on that just a little bit. Why vegetation management, you think,
we've got a lot of downed trees from 2 years of storms, and that all has to be managed. We have trees that are hazardous. that threaten houses, threaten trails, threaten people. It's a safety issue to a great degree. And we have trees that are old. When Sea Ranch was founded, the developers planted, the estimates vary from 400,000 to 600,000 trees on Sea Ranch, which are now all at the end of their lifespan. And how we deal with that, it's difficult. It's why our trees are falling down so much in the storms, because they're old and weakened. So when storms come, we get a disproportionate amount of tree damage.
Right. And most of us here probably had to deal with the tree or to deal with the tree or two on our property. And, my experience, probably many people, is that, it costs a fair amount of money to take a tree down. It's not inexpensive. So that, am I correct? That's the cost of managing all these trees could be very sizable.
It could be very sizable. And, I took 6 cypress trees off my lot. And I have a small lot on the meadow, and it had been planted with cypress trees. It's expensive to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine. What other things would you like to see in the next 3 years if you just, a wish list?
Well, I'm going to start with how the board functions.
Okay.
And I think we're going to see a board that functions with a great deal of respect to each other, all the members getting along. And that's one of my big goals, that we have a board that doesn't that treats each other, that the board members treat each other with respect. And one of the second things I think we're going to do is make sure we have a goal setting process, that we establish goals for the board each year. And the goals become the goals for the community manager and for the community as a whole. And we're all held accountable to how well we function in achieving the goals we set out. So that has been done in the past. It was a normal part of board service. It's been lost in a lot of the changes we've had. And I'd like to see it come back, because I think it was very effective.
Wonderful. Let's jump out a little bit to a longer time frame, if we can. Let's say the next 10 years or so. That's, obviously the things you've mentioned, the trees, we're going to be dealing with that for some time to come. We're not going to, but that's not going to be solved in 1 year or even 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
But what other things do you think from a strategic level, the next decade, what are we facing? What should we think about? What do you think is important?
I don't think long-term like that.
Okay.
I think you have to deal with what's in front of you, and you're always thinking of the impact of what you're doing. And the impact can be long-term. But we're always going to deal with trees. We're going to be dealing with the climate change. We may have to deal with bluff erosion. We may even have to do some retreat from the bluff. We don't know that.
Right.
We may have to look at different kinds of vegetation. I'm not sure that we're at that point yet. And I'm not going to live long enough to have to worry about it.
Well, you don't know that for sure, Dibby, but I understand what you're saying. But so you've mentioned a couple of things that are kind of driven by climate change.
Yes.
Things like bluff erosion. We could probably include wildfires in that, which, that's everywhere in California. Extreme weather events, I think the last 2 years qualify as extreme weather events for us, and just a whole host of things that maybe in the past we didn't have to think about as much at Sea Ranch, but now we're going to be forced to. Climate change is happening, whether we like it or not. And so it's right now it's our response that we're going to have to look at for the next while. Yeah. Okay.
You know, one of the things I heard a lot when I was campaigning was the desire among a lot of members to not move too fast into the future, to make sure that we keep the things that make Sea Ranch so valuable to us and that we love so much. Hanging on to the concepts, I'm especially interested in making sure that we keep an independent design review process. There are some of the basics at Sea Ranch. I want the trails to be accessible and
Right.
people to be able to enjoy them. The things that really drive people here.
Right.
I'd like to make sure we keep them. I'm interested in maintaining access for people to the beaches in as much as it's possible while still respecting the wildlife needs.
Right.
But Sea Ranch is a community of people, and I really, on that people part of it, we need more time with each other. We need more together time. It was so gratifying to see a huge number of people at the picnic over Labor Day, or Memorial Day.
Memorial Day, yeah.
I misspeak
Absolutely.
sometimes.
Yeah. And we lost track of the pandemic had a big effect on us.
Huge.
We weren't gathering. We're doing Zoom like we are. We were doing nothing but Zoom.
So I think I'd like to see the board meetings populated by people coming to hear, and also the board members showing up in person. I'd like them to be fun.
Wow.
Really
Okay.
interesting events. So
that's a challenging goal, I would say, Dibby.
that's a huge challenge. We
That
deal
is
with
great.
some really tough issues, but
Yeah, absolutely.
but
Well,
we all ought to have some fun in the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dibby, we got maybe 60 seconds or so left here. Is there anything you want to add about that? Any other thoughts that you just want to toss in as we wrap up here?
Well, I feel so privileged to be given a second chance at this. It's really, I didn't expect it. I was absolutely blown away by the response I got to my campaign.
Yeah.
And I think the message is there's still a pretty good constituency here at Sea Ranch that values those initial concepts. And we've got a lot to hang on to as we move forward into a more modern approach to governing.
That's great, Dibby. Well, thank you so much, viewers. We've been hearing from Debby Tyler, recently elected to our board of directors for a 3-year term. And Dibby, I do thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, and look forward to seeing you acting and achieving some of those goals down the line here.
Thanks so much, George.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next, we're going to talk with Gina Hubble. Gina was recently elected to the Sea Ranch Board of Directors, and Gina's been a longtime Sea Rancher, and this is her first time on the board, I believe. Gina, thanks for joining us. Congratulations on the election.
Thank you.
I want to kick this off. We're going to take about 15 minutes. I want to kick this off and just throw some big ideas, big open-ended questions for you, and just respond to everyone. Let's start off. So your term on the board is a 3-year term coming up. So in the next 3 years, when that you'll be on the board, what occurs to you as the important or the bigger things or issues or stuff you'd like to see tackled in this next 3 years?
Well, I think certainly the financial stability and both maintained and how we do that for the long term, especially, and everyone's been talking about infrastructure and how going forward we're going to need to plan for that and how are we going to fund it. And that kind of thing I'd like to see developing, if you will, even if we don't get to all the answers, but that we can think about that more proactively and really try to figure out what we can do to best achieve good infrastructure for the membership, you know, for the example, the water mains, you know, and how can we fund that? Because they are bursting in some cases and they definitely will need replacement. And so, again, I think that is part of financial stability, you know, not putting too undue pressure on the membership to fund all that.
Let me add for our viewers here, just to fill in for those who may not be aware, we've got roughly a 60-year-old water system in place, and there's parts of it, there are components to that system that are reaching the end of their lifetime.
Their life.
Yeah, and you know, it's just like owning a car, isn't it? You've got to repair stuff every so often. So that's one of the infrastructure issues that you were referring to, and you're right. It's going to take us time, and I would we think a sizable expense to do so, and so how we fund that is one of the big things.
Right, and how we make that most efficient for the membership, I think.
Right.
You know, practically speaking,
right. Tell me if this is correct. I believe I understand that you have a background in finance or have spent a lot of your career in finance. So how do you see that fitting in with your service on the board?
Well, that's a good question, especially in respect of your last one, because I did a lot of financings and structured different types of financing arrangements for municipalities or other public entities, as well as companies that wanted to fund on a long-term basis and have the lowest cost of funds all in and didn't need all the money today. So how did you manage to raise money that you could deploy as you needed those funds, which is very true of an infrastructure funding. You don't need 100% of your capital today. So how do you actually fund it where you're not drawing annually, like just with fees, but you have the ability to do it over time in amounts that are you've projected to fit the amount that you're going to need over a particular period. So I've done a lot of that, I think is applicable. And I've put together a lot of different types of transactions and combine that with, you know, my legal experience in terms of, you know, how do you structure this both legally and financially. And that was a lot of really what I focused on.
Wonderful, wonderful. What other things would you say in this first 3 years might be important or desirable or things that you think of?
Well, I think also actually, you know, in looking at some of the projects and where we ended up with them, like solar, for example, and even the heat pumps, you know, for the pools, I think we could put in place better processes so that we can determine early on the viability, the feasibility of a project and whether we've checked all the boxes. And I think if we do that more systematically, we'll able to reduce the number of projects that get delayed or end up not being viable because, well, let's say we didn't do a step along the way that we should have done earlier. So I think developing a more rigid and more rigorous process for that type of thing, I think would be helpful to the organization.
Okay. Let's expand the time frame a little bit. Yes, you're elected for 3 years, but let's think a little bit strategically, if you will, over the next decade, the next 10 years. What would you see are the things that we have to begin thinking about now that might impact us 10 years from now?
Well, I think we have to think about climate change for sure and how that's going to impact our commons. I mean, we're seeing that. I've been on the hedgerow working group, And you know what you know where the state of many of the hedgerows and
Right.
how do we I think of that as infrastructure. You know, it's a very important component of the Sea Ranch and what members think about and what's important to them as well. They're, you know, the term always used is iconic. And so that obviously vegetation is very affected by what we're going to see in climate change, whether that's increased heat. For example, it's going to change the vegetation, and we're seeing a lot of aging trees that are coming down during these storms. We don't, at least people project that the storms will continue. And so,
Right.
you know, how do we think about vegetation overall? You know, our commons, our trees, and how do we protect ourselves and people's homes and so forth from that? And if you think about it, if you go back to when the founders first came to this area, it was, you know, it was just grass. You know, there were, you know, other than the hedgerows they planted for, you know, create meadows for the sheep and wind protection, there was basically nothing. And so are we going back to that landscape in a sense? And if we get to situations where so many of the trees are aged out, or and in working on the group, I found that there's actually a fair amount of disease that's coming into you know, the trees and so forth that we'll have to think about as well. So I think environmental changes, we really have to be, again, thoughtful about, proactive about, and think of as a current focus, even though it's with respect to future conditions.
Right, right. And I was speaking with another one of the new directors who also brought up this topic. And my question there was, well, dealing with, let's pick trees, for instance, which is a longer term project. We're not going to do all of that in one year, obviously. But most of us, I'll give you the same anecdote. Many of us have had to deal with taking down a tree on our property because it was dying or diseased or whatever the situation was. And we found that taking a tree down is not inexpensive.
Yes.
And no matter who does it. So when we talk about the vast number of trees we may have to deal with, not saying they all come down, but still it's expensive to manage to manage a forest and manage trees. So the expense, the cost of that is going to be something we have to face?
Well, for sure. And also, I think it's like on average, if you don't have like the biggest tree in the world, the tallest tree is $3,000 for a tree, to 6,000. Again, depending. That's a hefty check to have to write for a member. And then if you look at all trees for the association, that's quite a big check. I think of it again as part, if you will, of the infrastructure. If you think that is going to be a focus, and that's going to be a necessary, you know, activity, you know, proactively managing our trees, then you have to think about how you're going to forward fund that too. It's just part of that, because it's very expensive to take those funds only annually, because that all comes basically from dues and or fees or you know, borrowing arrangements, which can be expensive. I think, and you sort of distinguish, is there a program that we could do for members that can help alleviate some of the costs for members? If you look at it on, again, a systematic basis, there's some other examples. And I was talking to someone with in another HOA with a lot of trees, and they said they basically all the members effectively went to one tree remover, you know, one
You're right.
and sort of transacted for everybody. So everybody got a reduced cost because there were, you know, the tree remover knew they had, we have all this business we can. So can we again be more thoughtful about the membership on a communal basis?
You're saying it's sort of purchasing in bulk after a fashion, purchasing a large quantity of the service, maybe negotiating a better price in the end.
Yeah, and I think what's even very important in all this is, what do you do with what you cut down? And how do you, you know, because the tree was sequestering carbon, it continues to. So how do you manage that? Or are you just going to create wood chips every time and have a pile that goes like Jack and the Beanstalk, you know, it just keeps going up. So what you do with the tree after you remove it, I think also is an important component of how we manage that process.
Right, right. I just want to relate another anecdote related to what you're saying from the early days at Sea Ranch when there wasn't nearly as much forest as there is now. I believe I read that Halprin commented that they for every 10 they planted thousands and thousands of trees, and for the reason they did it is they thought for every 10 trees that they planted, they thought only one would survive. And he said, as it turned out, for every 10 trees we planted, we ended up with 11.
Right.
So it didn't, it was maybe a miscalculation, or who knows what happened. So we end up with an inventory of trees that is much larger than anyone anticipated.
Right.
In many ways. What else on the 10-year or whenever the 10-year time frame might be of concern or of interest?
Well, I think that it's on a more general basis, but how do we preserve our sort of the vision, the construct of the Sea Ranch in a very changing world? And that's not just environmental, that's demographic, that's, just where costs are. Just how do we continue as we, want to, as we think we historically have in the face of some of these changes, and how do we make sure that we're following those precepts, but adapting to some of the changes and incorporating them? I think that's a broad brush, but it's important when you think about how you're going to do individual projects. So I think the airport airstrip was a good example. That was something that's been here forever, not used much, very much so on a limited, recreational basis. And with the move of people here and coming up here either more often or living here, it's become more active. So how do you address that new, phenomenon with respect to something that goes back to the beginning that, wasn't used the same way and really didn't even need that much regulation. It was used so little. So how do you take in these changes and maintain, continuity with the past?
Yeah, very good. Gina, tell me how you will, what kind of presence will you be on the board? How will you interact? We've watched a number of boards, over the years, and some boards have been more successful than others. Some boards have been more contentious than others. How do you see yourself fitting in, and what's your style or your approach?
My style, I've been on a number of boards, and I agree with you. They can be all kinds, and hopefully personalities mesh. I tend to be fairly analytical, and I try to see things on that basis, as opposed to introducing, bias or self-interest, or, obviously you take your experiences with you and your knowledge, but you want to look at it in the context of what you're trying to achieve for the group you're trying to achieve. And I think that if you do that, you can remove some of that tension. You can become more collaborative because you're looking at it, everybody sort of is on a level playing field then, you're not expressing a personal sort of emotional interest. So I think that I am forthright. I mean, I think that hopefully I'll be able to contribute positively. I tend to not talk if I don't have something to say, if you will. So I think hopefully I'll be both listening and contributing, and I see a good mix, and hopefully we will be a congenial, productive board.
Fantastic. Gina, we've come to the end of our time, but
already.
that's good. But I do want to thank you, and I wish you the very best, and good luck with your time on the board. And
thank you very, very much.
To success.
Thank you. Take care.
Hey, next up, we've got Rob Bedichek. Rob was also recently elected to the Sea Ranch Board of Directors. Rob is new to our board, hasn't served on the board before, but not too new to Sea Ranch, I don't believe. And Rob has a strong, without going into details, an extensive background in the corporate world at fairly high level, maybe a very high level if I'm honest there. Anyway, Rob, congratulations on your election, and thanks for taking time to talk with all of us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for connecting.
Absolutely. Rob, let's kick this off. I want to look at things sort of in time frames. So as you know, your term on the board is 3 years. And what I want to toss out is, what do you think about the next 3 years? What's important? What interests you? Where do you feel as a board and a community we could focus, or what are the high points we should be thinking of over a 3-year time period?
Well, it's the period I really think about is the 30-year period and beyond, the sort of the legacy, like what we're leaving the next generation of sea ranchers.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the next 3 years, I think we'll be doing what we've been doing for 60 years, which is revising plans and seeing how they execute budget versus actual on how we're spending money for roads and trees and security and all the amenities and all of those things. That I'm in learning mode now, so I'm absorbing, what the rules are that we have to abide by. I'm picking up some of the issues. I'm the liaison to the utility committee. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a learning mode. I'm not in a mode of telling people what to do. I'm not sure I'll ever be in a mode of telling people what to do, but I'm certainly not in that mode right now. I have to have some humility here and listen and learn.
Right. So you don't have an agenda that you're just going to bulldoze right through us on.
No, well, there's one of the former board members was championing changes to the airstrip, and he didn't get reelected, and I did, and I've got a strong interest in the airstrip. So I'm picking up all of the, stuff having to do with that, and want to tie up that issue so that we can move on with other stuff. I think and the sea ranchers are maybe got a little bit too much of a dose of minutia of airstrip, and I'm hoping that we can complete the work that was started a couple of years ago and move on to things that honestly are more important, like the water supply. I'm hoping that we can get some more cell sites and get the revenue from that and improve our cell coverage. I'm hoping that we can secure this problem, I guess, we have with our water pipes where the saddles are rusting, and then of course, the really big one is the huge one is the insurance companies dropping us, and also the fire safety that goes along with it. It's not just an insurance issue; it's a human safety issue. So, I think those are some big issues, but I don't have a, I just want to do the right thing for sea ranch now and in the long term.
Yeah. Backing up just a little bit on the airstrip, because that you're right, that was that took up a fair amount of time over the last I don't know, year or two, and my sense is that a lot of folks, probably me included, got lost in the weeds there. I don't happen to be a pilot. I don't happen to be a part of our population who lives next to the airstrip. I recognize it's an amenity that a lot of people appreciate having, but I never dove into the details too much. You're in a little bit different position, though. You are a pilot. You utilize the airstrip.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and actually, I was really motivated to run because I saw the dysfunction around that conversation between the board and staff and the population. And I'm not, pointing fingers and saying somebody was dysfunctional, but the collective conversation was, I would say, inefficient.
Yeah.
And so I hope that we can have an efficient resolution to the outstanding issues, and there's not much more drama or whatever, and it doesn't run into these meetings that have that go way long. So
yeah, absolutely. Your issues around infrastructure, are important too, that I think people are beginning. I mean, our water infrastructure is 60 years old. There are components that are at near the end of their life. Some of them have already failed in recent memory here, and it's clear that we've got to make an investment there. There's some challenges there. And I know you're diving into it, but that sounds like an expensive undertaking.
Well, like I say, I'm in learning mode. However, we can do expensive things. I mean, we did Sea Ranch Connect. We put the water in the first place, many years ago. We put it in the roads. All of that stuff costs money, and these things are typically funded, by taking out a loan and then paying it back, just the way municipalities do, or not exactly the way municipalities do, but they have different bond issuing rights, of course. But I think we'll do the calculations and we'll come up with a plan. Right. But beyond that, I can't. Like I say, I'm in learning mode. That's okay. I think every other board member knows more about this than I do.
Well, so, that's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, so eventually you'll be in the weeds. Well, maybe not too much in the weeds, but enough.
I'll be in the details. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll get into the details. Sure.
Yeah, good.
I have a career of dealing with the details and listening to a lot of conflicting data, and then needing to make a decision without having the luxury of waiting for forever. Clock's ticking, and you have to make a decision. So
right.
And I'm one of 7, so
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you need to be an expert in everything. Let me come back to something you said earlier too, that you had interest in the 30-year outlook, and so I wanted to jump to where I posed it to the other new directors was, what do you think is important? I asked for sort of the 10-year range. 30 years important too. We are required under California law to put together a 30-year plan. I believe we're nearly due or soon to be due to have that together. And regardless of what California law says, it's good to think in longer strategic time periods. What jumps up for you? I don't care, 10 years, 30 years, what jumps up for you that you think we should be aware of or thinking of?
Well, I guess a big one are our forests and our trees. The forest, and then the interface between the forest and the open spaces. I think, sort of taking the big picture over the last 100 years, 100 plus years ago, we just cut down everything, and it was just barren. Cut down everything and then let sheep graze it. Then we said, wow, that was really, really bad, which it was, big environmental disaster. So then we planted a whole bunch of pines that were the same age, and that was a different kind of disaster. So we got better. It's like, well, no, trees are good. Trees are good. But then we have this problem that we have all of these, it's like kind of monoculture, mono age, and that's very risky because they can all fall prey to an environmental change or a pest or something like that, and then it can be a huge fire hazard. And I really felt this personally from having a previous second home up in the Sierras, and we our house was just a few miles from a 250,000 acre fire, and it was scary and it was disturbing. I've also hiked a bit more than halfway from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. And the last few hundred miles that I've done over the last few years, there's been huge burn areas. It's very sad. And I think it came from a don't cut anything policy that we used to have. And now people realize, okay, we don't want to cut down everything, and we don't want to not cut anything. Like those two extremes don't work. Right. So I think we need to figure out a forest plan that is one that whatever it is, we don't have a high probability, or we don't have very much of a probability of a catastrophic failure that's going to wipe out the forest, like so many forests in the West have been wiped out. That's number one. And two, like that nobody gets harmed. If we do have a forest fire, that people can evacuate, people can get out. The firefighters aren't risking their lives to go into a house because we have done whatever mitigations are necessary. And that also should help with the insurance issue, I think.
Yeah.
But again, I don't have a particular, like, I'm still, like, I've got personal experiences that really motivate me. And I think this is probably the biggest issue we face over the next couple of years. But I'm hoping that in 30 and 50 and 100 years from now, people look back and say they made the right choice, not just for their time, but they also got more diversity in the plants, and they got more diversity in the age. Like, they thought about, they had one extreme, cut everything. They had another extreme, don't cut anything. And then they went to something, in between. Now, if we can be safe and not cut anything, I don't have a problem with that. But I don't know how you do that. The reason my place in the Sierras didn't burn is that between our house and this massive fire was a lumber company. And that lumber company did a beautiful job of managing their forests. We had bears, we had all sorts of, great wildlife there that survived because they really managed their forest well. And it was a delight to go walking through their lands, which they allowed us to do unless it was extreme fire danger. Yeah, it was open for people to walk through. So
it also occurs to me that part of the management of the forests, we've felt the impact the last 2 years of these extreme weather events in the winter, and we've seen far more trees come down than most of us have seen in a long time. Unfortunately, some of those trees damaged residences pretty severely. So there's that impact from, we believe those extreme weather events are precipitated by climate change. Sure. And
I think there's pretty broad consensus on that one.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So isn't that more impetus for us to successfully manage our forests and deal with for instance, the dead and dying trees or diseased trees, or how we manage that?
I think it sharpens it a bit, but I think we would have this problem even if climate change were going the other way. I mean, we've got trees that are one culture, like pests are not brand new, and a lot of what causes the forest to be vulnerable is the pests destroying the trees, which makes them, great fuel, and then having them be the same age. I'm not a forester. I've employed foresters for many years for managing forest lands, but I don't know how much I would point to climate change versus the monoculture versus the mono age. I don't know. I'm not, like, that's a scientific question for some scientists that I'm not. So
gotcha.
Maybe it's all climate change. Maybe, I don't know how you would allocate that, but it kind of doesn't matter. In a sense, for what we do at Sea Ranch, we need to make our forests and the forest interface with homes be resilient.
Yeah.
We need to have policies that keep people reasonably safe.
Right.
And it's lucky we haven't had anybody injured by trees falling yet, but they have fallen on houses and on living spaces. And I've spoken to Sea Ranchers who were, like, really alarmed by what happened to their house, and how, like, they could have been in that room when the tree fell through it. So
pretty scary. Yeah, for sure.
But we can deal with it. Like, we've had other challenges. Sea Ranch has gone through lots of challenges. Just the birth of Sea Ranch, God, that was like an enormous thing. And then the whole moratorium on building for years, like, oh, wow, that was a pretty big deal,
huge.
Right? So this is just, every generation gets its set of challenges, and this is just ours.
Let me turn one last thing before we wrap up. Tell me how who are you, or what is your style? You're going to be on a board, and the way you interact with people, and the way you collaborate or not collaborate, depending. But talk about your style and your approach to working as a board, working as a unit like that.
Well, I start with my mom was a social worker, and I approach a lot of my executive work kind of with that mindset of wanting to, like, connect with people and collaborate with people. And I assume that everybody is an intelligent, well-meaning person. And if I run into problems with people, I still I don't try to turn away. I try to, like, find wherever we can collaborate. But I really, this group of board members, I'm very optimistic about. I had a long talk with Tim, our board chair. I think it's going to go. I think it's going to go pretty well. I think this is going to be a pretty collaborative board. I'm optimistic about it. But yeah, my style is a collaborative one. I'm very straightforward, very direct, and yeah. So just try to move things forward.
Yeah,
you know?
wonderful. Well, Rob, I do thank you for your time. We'll draw to a close right now. And thank you for your thoughts and time and everything. Once again, congratulations. And we'll see you at the next board meeting or at the supermarket or on the trails or wherever.
Yeah, on the trails.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be running. Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.
You've been watching This Sea Ranch Life. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation with our 3 newest board members and that you'll come back and join us again soon. Until then, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too.